The gunshot echoed through the valley, sending a flock of starlings into the sky as Lila Newsom clutched her husband's bloodied hand for the last time. This was not how she imagined her life at 24, widowed, alone, and responsible for a small ranch in the unforgiving territory of Montana in 1883. 3 months later, Lila stood in the doorway of her barn, watching as the summer storm gathered on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising the kind of downpour that could wash away roads and drown fields. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, remembering how Walter used to predict storms with uncanny accuracy. Walter had been dead for 97 days, but who was counting? She was. The ranch was struggling. Without Walter's steady hand, the cattle were slowly dwindling, either to predators or her own inexperience. The neighboring ranchers, once friendly, now circled like vultures, making offers on her land that grew more insulting with each passing week. Harrison Kent, the cattle baron who owned most of the valley, had been the most persistent, sending his men to check on her with thinly veiled threats disguised as concern. She stepped inside the barn, the familiar smell of hay and leather offering small comfort. The roof needed mending before the storm hit, but climbing up there alone seemed more dangerous than letting some rain in. Lila sighed, gathering tools anyway. If she stood on the ladder and just patched the worst spots, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the barn walls. Lila climbed up the ladder, hammer in hand, reaching for the loose boards. The first fat raindrops began to fall as she stretched, the wind suddenly gusting so hard that the ladder wobbled beneath her. "Careful there, madam," a deep voice called from the doorway. Lila startled, nearly losing her grip on the ladder. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the gray afternoon light, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low against the wind. "This is private property," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady despite her precarious position. "Didn't mean to frighten you," the man said, stepping further into the barn. "Just seeking shelter from this storm. My horse pulled up lame about a mile back." As he moved into the light, Lila could see him more clearly, trail-worn clothes, a week's growth of beard, but clear, honest eyes. Not one of Kent's men, she decided. Those usually traveled in pairs and carried their arrogance like another weapon. "I can pay for the shelter," he offered, reaching for his pocket. "Put your money away," Lila said, carefully descending the ladder. "I'm not so hard up that I'd charge a man for getting out of the rain." Lightning cracked outside, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap. The man's horse, tethered just outside, whinnied in fear. "Better get your horse in here," Lila suggested. He nodded gratefully and went back out into the now pouring rain. When he returned, leading a limping chestnut gelding, he was soaked to the skin. "Thank you kindly, madam," he said, removing his hat. Water cascaded from the brim. His dark hair fell in wet curls around a face weathered by sun and wind. "Name's Holt Xavier. I was heading to Helena when this storm blew in." "Lila Newsom," she replied. This was the Newsom ranch. Understanding flickered in his eyes at her correction, but he didn't pry. Instead, he knelt to examine his horse's leg. "Picked up a stone," he explained. "Should be fine after a night's rest." Lila nodded, suddenly aware of how alone they were. A stranger in her barn might mean danger, but something in his manner put her at ease. Perhaps it was desperation for adult conversation after months of solitude, or simply the honest way he looked at her, not with pity or calculation, but straightforward respect. "That roof won't fix itself," she said, gesturing toward the ladder. "And I can't reach the worst of it." Holt glanced up, assessing the damage. "I could help with that if you'd allow it. Seems the least I can do for the shelter." Before Lila could answer, the sky opened up completely, rain hammering the barn roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Water began to drip through in several places. "I'd be grateful," she admitted. "Tools are there." Holt removed his wet coat, revealing lean, muscular arms as he rolled up his shirt sleeves. He climbed the ladder with easy confidence, hammering the loose boards back into place with efficient movements. Lila found herself watching his hands, strong, capable hands that moved with purpose. "You traveling alone, Mr. Xavier?" she asked, handing him another nail when he reached down. "Just Holt," he corrected. "And yes, madam, been that way since the war. You fought." The war had ended nearly 20 years ago, which would make him older than she'd initially thought, though not by much. Perhaps early 30s. Tail end of it, was just a boy, really. He secured another board. "You running this place alone?" Lila stiffened slightly. "My husband died this spring." "Rustlers?" Holt paused in his work, meeting her eyes with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. It's hard country for anyone alone." "I'm managing," she said, more defensively than she intended. "No doubt," he replied, resuming his work. "Just an observation, not a judgment." The storm raged outside while they worked together in companionable silence. When the roof was as secure as they could make it, Lila realized the day had slipped away. Darkness was falling, and the storm showed no signs of abating. "You can't travel in this," she said. "There's a cot in the tack room. It's not much, but it's dry." Holt hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose or cause talk." Lila almost laughed. "Mr. Xavier, my nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and after 3 months of widowhood, I assure you they've already talked all they care to." A small smile touched his lips. "Then I accept your hospitality, Mrs. Newsom, thank you." "I should check on the house," Lila said, wrapping her shawl around her. "There's a lantern on the hook there if you need light." She dashed through the rain to her small cabin, feeling strangely energized. Having someone to talk to, even briefly, had lifted some of the heavy solitude that had been pressing down on her since Walter's death. In the kitchen, she found herself taking extra care with dinner, not just the usual biscuits and beans she made for herself, but adding bacon and opening a jar of her precious preserved peaches. When the food was ready, she hesitated, staring at the 2 plates she'd prepared. Was she being foolish? Inviting a strange man to dinner. Walter would have been cautious, always practical about the dangers of the frontier. But Walter was gone, and she was tired of eating alone, covering the plates with a cloth. Lila headed back to the barn, rain pounding on her shoulders. Inside, she found Holt brushing down his horse, speaking to it in low, soothing tones. "I brought food," she said, suddenly shy. "Thought you might be hungry." His eyes lit up with surprise and gratitude. "That's mighty kind of you." They sat on bales of hay, the lantern casting warm light around them as they ate. Holt complimented her cooking with such genuine appreciation that Lila found herself blushing. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal," he admitted. "Trail food gets tiresome." "Where are you headed?" she asked. "You mentioned Helena," Holt nodded. "Got a job offer from an old Army friend. He's starting a freight company, needs trustworthy drivers." "Sounds more stable than wandering," Lila observed. "That's the hope." He set aside his empty plate. "Been drifting too long." Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn in stark white light. In that brief moment, Lila saw something in Holt's eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Then darkness fell again, and the moment passed. "Your husband," Holt said carefully. "Was it recent?" Lila nodded. 3 months ago." Walter was checking on cattle in the north pasture. 3 men ambushed him, tried to take the herd. He managed to get back to the house, but... She trailed off, the memory of Walter's blood-soaked shirt still vivid. "Did they catch who did it?" "No." Lila's voice hardened. "Sheriff came out, took a look around, said he'd make inquiries. Nothing came of it. Walter didn't have many friends in official places." Holt seemed to consider this. "And now you're here alone." "I'm managing," Lila repeated, but with less conviction than before. "I believe you are," Holt said. "But managing and living aren't the same thing." The simple truth of his words struck her deeply. She had been surviving, not living, these past months going through the motions of existence without really being present in her own life. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting. "What are you managing or not living?" A slow smile spread across his face, appreciating her turning his words back on him. "Fair question. I suppose I've been managing too. Moving from place to place, job to job, not settling anywhere long enough to belong. The war," she guessed, partly. Holt looked down at his hands. Saw things no young man should see, did things too. After that, nowhere felt like home anymore. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. In this strange, storm-bound sanctuary, they were just two lonely souls sharing truths that might have remained buried in calmer weather. "I should get back to the house," Lila said eventually, gathering the plates. "There are extra blankets in that trunk if you need them." "Thank you, Mrs. Newsom, for everything." "Lila," she corrected him. "If I'm calling you Holt, you should call me Lila," he nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Good night, Lila. Good night, Holt." She hurried back through the rain, wondering at the strange fluttering in her chest. It had been so long since she'd felt anything but grief, and worry that this new sensation, this lightness, seemed almost foreign. Morning brought clear skies and birdsong. Lila woke early, as was her habit, and set about making breakfast. Without consciously deciding to, she made enough for two. When she carried the food out to the barn, she found Holt already awake, repairing a broken stall door. "You don't have to do that," she said, setting down the tray. "I know," he replied, driving in the last nail. "Wanted to make myself useful." They ate breakfast together, the easy conversation of the night before continuing in the daylight. When they finished, Holt checked his horse's leg, finding it much improved. "I should be moving on," he said, though he made no move to saddle his horse. "Yes, I suppose you should," Lila agreed, equally stationary. A moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Holt cleared his throat. "I noticed your east fence line is down in places. Before I go, I could help repair it if you'd like." Relief flooded through Lila. She wasn't ready to return to her solitude, not just yet. "That would be very helpful. I've been meaning to fix it, but there's always something more urgent." They spent the day working side by side, repairing fences, mucking out stalls, and tending to a dozen small tasks that had overwhelmed Lila on her own. Holt worked tirelessly, his movements efficient and practiced. By mid-afternoon, they had accomplished more than Lila had managed in weeks. "You've done this before," she observed as they paused for water. Holt nodded. "Grew up on a farm in Missouri, left to fight, then drifted afterward, but some skills you don't forget." "And now Helena," Lila said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "And now Helena," he echoed, looking at her with an unreadable expression. That evening, Lila insisted he stay in the spare room of her cabin rather than the barn. "You've earned a proper bed after all that work," she said firmly. Holt accepted with a courteous nod, though she noticed how his eyes scanned the cabin as he entered, noting exits, assessing the space. Old habits from the war, perhaps. The cabin felt different with another person in it, warmer somehow, despite the cooling September air. They cooked dinner together, Holt proving surprisingly adept in the kitchen. "My mother taught me," he explained when Lila expressed surprise. "Said no man should depend entirely on a woman's cooking." "Smart woman," Lila said with a smile. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The night was peaceful, the storm's violence just a memory. "Walter and I bought this place 5 years ago," Lila said suddenly. "We had such plans, children, cattle, maybe even horses eventually. He loved horses." Holt listened quietly, letting her speak of her husband without awkwardness or jealousy. It was a gift. She hadn't expected this space to remember Walter without drowning in grief. "You loved him very much," Holt observed when she fell silent. "I did," Lila agreed. "Still do, I suppose. But it's changing. The grief, I mean, it's not so sharp now, more like an ache I've grown accustomed to." "That's how it goes," Holt said softly. "The hurt doesn't disappear, but it makes room for other feelings eventually." Lila turned to look at him, wondering what losses had taught him this wisdom. "You've known grief too?" It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "My wife, Emily. Influenza took her the winter after I came home from the war. We had just 8 months together as husband and wife." "I'm sorry," Lila said, understanding now why he'd been so respectful of her mourning. "It was a long time ago," Holt replied. "Almost 15 years now. Like you said, the grief changes." They sat in silence after that, each lost in memories, yet somehow less alone in their shared understanding of loss. When Lila finally rose to go inside, she felt a curious reluctance to end the evening. "Good night, Holt," she said, lingering in the doorway. "Good night, Lila," he replied, his voice warm in the darkness. The next morning, Lila woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in her kitchen. For a disoriented moment, she thought Walter had returned, that the past 3 months had been a terrible dream. Then reality reasserted itself and she remembered Holt. She dressed quickly and found him at her stove frying bacon. "Hope you don't mind," he said when he saw her. "Thought I'd make myself useful again." "Not at all," she assured him, pouring herself coffee from the pot he'd prepared. They ate breakfast together, then returned to the endless work of the ranch. Holt's horse was fully recovered, but neither of them mentioned his departure to Helena. Instead, they tackled the rotting boards on the chicken coop, replaced a broken window in the cabin, and began repairs on the wagon that had sat idle since Walter's death. Days passed this way, one blending into the next. Holt slept in the spare room, rising early to make coffee before they began their work together. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, talking or sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Lila found herself laughing again, really laughing for the first time since Walter died. A week turned into 2. The promised job in Helena went unmentioned, though Lila knew it must be waiting. She couldn't bring herself to ask, afraid that voicing the question would break the spell that had settled over them. On market day, they took the newly repaired wagon into town together. Lila was acutely aware of the glances and whispers as they moved through the small settlement. A widow with a strange man of course people would talk. She held her head high, refusing to be shamed for having help on her ranch. At the general store, Mr. Peterson greeted her with more warmth than he'd shown in months. "Mrs. Newsom, good to see you. And who's your friend?" "This is Mr. Xavier," Lila said formally. "He's been helping with repairs at the ranch." "Pleased to meet you, sir," Peterson said, shaking Holt's hand. "Any friend of Mrs. Newsom is welcome here." As they gathered supplies, Lila noticed the difference in how people treated her with Holt by her side. No longer did they offer pitying glances or condescending advice. The change was subtle, but unmistakable respect had returned to their interactions. "Word travels fast in small towns," Holt observed as they loaded the wagon. Lila nodded. "They've decided you're respectable enough, it seems." "Am I?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I haven't decided yet," Lila replied, surprising herself with the teasing tone. Holt's laugh was warm and genuine. "Fair enough." As they prepared to leave town, a group of men approached the wagon. Lila recognized them immediately: Harrison Kent and 3 of his ranch hands. Her spine stiffened. "Mrs. Newsom," Kent said, his gaze sliding past her to Holt. "I see you found help, Mr. Kent," Lila acknowledged coolly. "Yes, Mr. Xavier has been kind enough to assist with some repairs." Kent's eyes narrowed. "Don't believe we've met, Xavier. You new to these parts?" "Just passing through," Holt said easily, though Lila noticed how he positioned himself slightly in front of her. "Passing through," Kent repeated skeptically. "Yet here you are, what, 2 weeks later?" "Is there a problem, Mr. Kent?" Lila interjected. Kent smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No problem at all, Mrs. Newsom, just looking out for a neighbor's interests. These are dangerous times for a woman alone." "I'm not alone at present," Lila pointed out. "No," Kent agreed. "You're not. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? A drifter appears just when your ranch is struggling. Some might call that opportunistic." Holt's posture changed, subtly, still relaxed in appearance, but coiled with tension. "Some might call these kinds of insinuations disrespectful to a lady." Kent's men shifted, hands drifting toward their weapons. The air grew thick with tension. "We should be getting back," Lila said firmly, placing a restraining hand on Holt's arm. "Good day, Mr. Kent." Kent stepped back, allowing them to pass, but his voice followed them. "My offer still stands, Mrs. Newsom. When you're ready to sell, I'll be waiting." They drove in silence until they were well out of town. Finally, Holt spoke. "That man has designs on your land." "Yes," Lila confirmed. He's been trying to buy it since before Walter died. Needs it for access to water. And now he thinks a widow can't hold onto property for long. He's just waiting for me to fail. Holt was quiet for a long moment. Is that likely that you'll fail? Lila gripped the reins tighter. It was before you came. I was barely keeping up with essential work. But now. She trailed off, uncertain how to continue. Now, Holt prompted. Now I'm not sure, she admitted. You won't stay forever. You have that job in Helena. The words hung between them, the first acknowledgement of his eventual departure. Yes, Holt said slowly. I do. Neither spoke again until they reached the ranch. As they unloaded supplies, Lila tried to imagine returning to her solitary existence after Holt left. The thought left her cold despite the warm afternoon sun. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Holt finally broke their unspoken agreement not to discuss the future. Kent wasn't entirely wrong, he said quietly. Lila turned to him, startled. What do you mean about my timing? Being a drifter who appeared when you were vulnerable. Holt stared out at the horizon. It does look suspicious. I never thought maybe you should have, he interrupted gently. You took me in, trusted me, barely knowing me. I'm a good judge of character, Lila insisted. Holt smiled slightly. Maybe so, but Kent made me realize something. I've stayed too long without being clear about my intentions. Lila's heart began to race. Your intentions? I should have left for Helena 2 weeks ago, Holt said. The job won't have waited. But I couldn't bring myself to go. Why? Lila asked, barely breathing. Holt turned to face her fully. Because in 2 weeks, this place has felt more like home than anywhere has in 15 years. Because working beside you, talking with you, just being near you has made me feel alive again. He paused, searching her face. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Lila Newsom, and that terrifies me. Lila's breath caught in her throat. The confession was both exactly what she'd hoped for and entirely unexpected. Holt, you don't need to say anything, he said quickly. I know it's too soon after your husband. I know you're still grieving. I just needed to be honest before I leave. Leave, Lila repeated, seizing on the word. You're still going? I should, Holt said, though he made no move to rise. It's the right thing to do. You need time, and I. He faltered. I need to know that what I'm feeling is real, not just gratitude for your kindness or the loneliness of years on the trail. Lila reached out, taking his hand. His skin was warm, calloused from work. When would you go? Tomorrow, he said, before I lose my resolve. And if I asked you to stay? The words were out before Lila could reconsider them. Holt's eyes widened. Would you? Lila thought of Walter, of their love, their plans, their life cut short. She thought of the grief that had consumed her and how it had begun to ease in Holt's presence. Not vanishing, but making room, as he'd said, for new feelings. I don't know what this is between us, she said carefully. It's too new, too unexpected, but I know I'm not ready for it to end. What are you saying, Lila? I'm saying don't leave, not yet. She squeezed his hand. Stay the winter. Help me get the ranch through the cold months, and we'll see where we stand when spring comes. Hope kindled in Holt's eyes. You're sure there will be talk? Let them talk, Lila said with newfound confidence. This is my life, my choice. Holt lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then I'll stay, until spring, and we'll take each day as it comes. The winter of 1883 proved to be one of the harshest in memory. Snow piled high around the cabin, winds howled across the valley, and temperatures dropped lower than anyone had seen in years. But inside the Newsom ranch, warmth prevailed. Holt and Lila worked side by side through the short days, caring for the animals, maintaining the buildings against the snow's weight, and preserving what they could from the fall harvest. In the evenings, they read aloud by lamplight, played cards, or simply talked, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams of their futures. Their relationship evolved slowly, respectfully. Holt never presumed, always careful of Lila's still healing heart. But as December gave way to January, and January to February, something undeniable grew between them. Hands lingered when passing dishes at dinner. Eyes met and held across the room. The space between them when they sat before the fire grew smaller. The first kiss came during a blizzard in late February. They had been forced to rescue 2 calves from the storm, bringing the shivering creatures into the kitchen to warm them. After hours of tending to the animals, success finally came when the calves struggled to their feet, danger past. In the relief of that moment, Lila had turned to Holt, her face radiant with triumph and joy. He had looked at her with such tenderness that she moved without thinking, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and then answered with a depth of feeling that left them both breathless. "I've been wanting to do that since November," Holt admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Lila smiled. "I've been wanting you to since December." As winter slowly released its grip on the land, Lila found herself watching Holt with growing certainty. This was no fleeting attraction born of loneliness or convenience. What had begun in a storm-lashed barn had deepened into something true and lasting. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal. The meadows turned green, wildflowers appeared in sheltered corners, and the cattle grew sleek on fresh grass. The ranch, which had seemed so overwhelming to Lila alone, now thrived under their combined care. On the anniversary of Walter's death, Lila rode alone to the small grave on the hillside overlooking the ranch. She sat beside the wooden marker, running her fingers over the carved letters of his name. "I miss you," she told him softly. "I always will. You were my first love and nothing can change that." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I've found room in my heart for someone else too. I think you'd like him, Walter. He's honest and kind and strong like you were. Different too, of course, but good." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I hope you'd be happy for me. I think you would. You never wanted me to be alone." When she returned to the cabin, Holt was waiting on the porch. He didn't ask where she'd been, he knew. Instead, he simply opened his arms and she went into them, finding comfort in his embrace. That night, under a sky brilliant with stars, Holt asked Lila to marry him. Not to replace what she had lost, he was careful to say, but to build something new alongside those memories. "I love you," he told her, his voice steady and sure. "I never expected to find love again, especially not in a storm-soaked barn in Montana. But here you are and here I am, and I don't want to spend another day not being your husband." Lila's answer was unhesitating. Yes. They were married in May, a simple ceremony in the meadow behind the house. The entire town attended curiosity as much as celebration, driving some, but genuine happiness for others. Even Harrison Kent came, though his congratulations seemed forced through gritted teeth. "Still planning to wait me out, Mr. Kent?" Lila asked sweetly when he offered stilted good wishes. "The offer remains open, Mrs. Newsom, or I suppose it's Mrs. Xavier now," Kent replied stiffly. "Newsom Xavier," Lila corrected. "And you should know we've just purchased the old Murphy place to the east. We'll be expanding, not selling." Kent's face darkened, but with so many witnesses he could only nod and move on. "That was unkind of me," Lila admitted to Holt later. "But satisfying." Holt laughed, twirling her in a dance under the open sky. "You, my love, are a force of nature when crossed." "Only when protecting what matters," she replied, gazing up at the man who had walked into her barn during a storm and somehow never truly walked out again. That night, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home together, Holt wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them gazing at the stars. "Did you ever make it to Helena?" Lila asked suddenly. Holt chuckled, his breath warm against her hair. "No, never did. Do you regret it?" "The job, the opportunities you might have had there." "Not for a single moment," he assured her, turning her in his arms to meet her eyes. "Some men search their whole lives for purpose, for belonging. I found mine the day I walked into your barn." Lila smiled, remembering that rain-soaked afternoon that now seemed like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. "I'm glad your horse pulled up lame." "Best piece of luck I ever had," Holt agreed, before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that promised all the tomorrows they would share. The years that followed brought challenges, as all years do in the harsh country of Montana droughts and blizzards, good markets and bad. But they also brought joy. The birth of their daughter Emily the following spring, named for Holt's first wife in a gesture of honoring the past while embracing the future. 2 years later, their son Walter joined the family, carrying Lila's first husband's name and Holt's warm eyes. The Newsom Xavier Ranch prospered, growing from a struggling homestead to one of the most successful operations in the county. Harrison Kent eventually sold his holdings and moved east, defeated not by disaster but by the steady, combined strength of a couple who had each known loss and found each other. And sometimes, on summer evenings when storms gathered on the horizon, Lila and Holt would sit on their porch, watching the lightning dance across the sky, remembering how a widow had waited alone in a barn and a cowboy had walked in and never walked out.